The year was 1936, when Life magazine promised to bring the world to our doorstep. An old-fashioned sort of world filled with pomp and ritual. Over the last quarter century, a new world has emerged, ringing of change and discovery and awareness. Join us now as Life looks back at 25 of the most significant events which have shaped our bold new era. This is a journey through the recent 80s, the decade when Americans tried to put a battered world back together. A journey back into the 70s, the decade of loud change, when a new awareness liberated millions. A journey back to the turbulent 60s, the decade of rebellion, when old standards and a way of life were suddenly blowing in the wind. Step back through time as Life looks at a quarter century that reshaped our country. Events that often saddened us, yet revitalized us in the process.
Now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something is wrong here. Something is terribly wrong. I'm in behind the motorcade, trying to follow them. It looks as though they're going to Parkland Hospital.
They came out of a brilliant November Dallas day. The shots that put hope to bed and left a nation dazed and weeping. For one brief shining moment, the world had seemed perfectible.
My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
Maybe we had stars in our eyes from all the glamour that JFK offered us all, or maybe it was just a cruel way of telling us the fun was over. But as JFK was laid to rest, the people came together like never before, united in their grief, all in one family. And the tone of a new time for America was set. Hardly had the dirges died away, then a new sound drifted across the Atlantic. It wasn't long before a quartet of mop-headed British blokes took America by storm.
Is that a Beatle haircut you've got? How'd you work it out?
Well, I just let my hair flop around until it's all messy.
What do your parents say about it?
They don't like it.
And why do you call it that way?
Because I like the Beatles.
Who came up with the name Beatles, and what does it really mean?
John thought of the name Beatles, and he'll tell you about it now. It means Beatles, doesn't it? You know, that's just a name. You know, like shoe. It means shoe.
The shoes. You see, we could have been called the Shoes for all you know.
Their lyrics, their look, and especially that hair lifted the hearts of a whole generation.
With a love like that, you know you should be glad.
1967 saw an unprecedented breakthrough in medicine. Organ transplants had become commonplace, but who would have thought you could replace the human heart? That's exactly what happened in South Africa, as Dr. Christian Barnard made history when he transplanted the heart of one woman into the chest of a man suffering from heart failure.
It just started immediately to beat. And I can tell you could feel the atmosphere when that heart started to beat in that operating theater. You know, it was just terrific when it started to beat. And I turned around to my technician, who was a very placid sort of boy, and I said to him, "Do you think it's going to work?" And he said, "Yes, I'm sure it's going to work."
All the time, there was the terrible low rumble of racial injustice. It was Martin Luther King, a man of peace, who tried to do something about it. Americans had first seen what he was up against when violence erupted in Birmingham, and the ugly scenes were broadcast on national television.
In a supercharged atmosphere, sparks of racial antagonism flared into violence. Firemen turned their hoses on the angry crowd. Police dogs were brought in. In 5 days, about 2,500 Negroes were arrested. They filled the jails and other detention quarters in what Dr. King calls fulfillment of a dream.
I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
Disperse. You are ordered to disperse.
It took years to overcome, but not before the battlefield was soaked in martyrs' blood.
Martin Luther King Jr. was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee, shot in the face as he stood alone on the balcony of his hotel room.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
Hi, Houston, Apollo 11. How many miles out do you have it now? Roughly about 50,000. It's a beautiful night.
Just 8 years after President Kennedy promised to put a man on the moon, man's fairy tale adventure was finally being achieved.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Altitude 4,200. Houston, you're go for landing. Over. We're go. Same type. We're go. Altitude, velocity light. 8.5 down. 220 feet. 15 forward. 11 forward. Coming down nicely. 200 feet. 4.5 down. 5.5 down. 60 seconds. 40 feet down. 2.5. Picking up some dust. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. I'm at the foot of the ladder. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It could have been a moon scene. Such strange sights and extraordinary sounds emanated from a hillside near a town called Woodstock.
The summer resort area of New York State's Catskill Mountains is virtually paralyzed this weekend by an overwhelming crowd of pop rock music fans from all over the country. At least 300,000 young people, perhaps as many as 500,000, have jammed the highways and country roads, trying to get to a music festival featuring the most popular performers of rock and folk music. So many people showed up, the festival was declared free and open to everyone. Police say they're amazed at the politeness. There has been virtually no violence.
It was the last great pageant of the 60s, celebrating the causes of a generation, peace and love. As the 70s began to unfold, there was anything but peace and love on the Kent State campus in Ohio.
By order of President White, the university campus has been closed. Please return to your dormitories and leave the campus by the shortest route as soon as possible.
Students protested against the war, and National Guardsmen shot them down.
Somebody call for an ambulance! Get an ambulance up here!
When the shooting stopped, 4 lay dead, and Marianne Vecchio's lament over the body of Jeffrey Glenn Miller became a symbol of U.S. frustration and grief over the war, and symbolized the gulf between America's young and their government. Bad-mouthed at home, the very same government was winning accolades abroad. 2 decades of icy hostility between China and the U.S. began to thaw when President Nixon made his historic visit to China for talks with Chairman Mao that led to a joint communique.
What we have said in that communique is not nearly as important as what we will do in the years ahead to build a bridge across 16,000 miles and 22 years of hostility which have divided us in the past.
The way had been paved by the secret skill of Henry Kissinger, and President Nixon's week-long visit astonished and excited the world. In fact, this crack in the Great Wall had opened communications with the Chinese on all levels.
This was the week that changed the world.
Changed, too, was the status of American women. 50 years in the coming, ERA, a proposed constitutional amendment guaranteeing equal rights for women, was passed by Congress in 1972.
Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex.
38 states were needed to ratify the bill before it could become a law. And what took place was a fierce battle between ERA supporters and their vocal opponents.
If the Equal Rights Amendment were ratified, these girls could be forced to go to combat. God didn't intend women for NFL football or combat.
It will take a miracle to get the Equal Rights Amendment ratified in the current climate. We are realists.
The miracle didn't happen, but by its very existence, ERA has helped to right many of the inequities between the sexes. Again, the U.S. Constitution was called into question as Watergate, the name of a Washington office building, became the most infamous word of the 70s. It housed the offices of the Democratic National Committee, and in an attempt to steal political secrets, agents of President Nixon's re-election campaign got caught red-handed. An investigation examined this question: what did the president know, and when did he know it?
I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
The nation watched the dramatic congressional hearings as the president's men denied that Nixon himself had known of the crime.
President Nixon had no knowledge of or involvement in either the Watergate affair itself or the subsequent efforts of a cover-up of the Watergate.
But when White House counsel John Dean took the stand, he painted a picture of the president as a lying schemer who believed he was above the law.
Now, I guess you're fully aware, Mr. Dean, of the gravity of the charges you have made under oath against the highest official of our land, the President of the United States.
Yes, I am.
And being so aware, do you still stand on your statement?
Yes, I do.
Nixon was implicated further by White House tape recordings he himself had ordered. Finally, to escape impeachment, Nixon became the first U.S. president ever to resign from office.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office. Sure, we've done some things wrong in this administration. And the top man always takes the responsibility, and I've never ducked it. But I want to say one thing. Mistakes, yes, but for personal gain, never.
Another helicopter departure came after 30 years of conflict as the war in Vietnam was finally coming to an abrupt end. On April 29, 1975, with North Vietnamese troops pressing in on the city of Saigon, it became a race against time to evacuate all Americans and as many loyal Vietnamese as possible.
The grounds of the American Embassy in Saigon. This was the principal point of pickup for Americans and some Vietnamese waiting to be evacuated. The whole compound is surrounded by a high wall. The people here were herded into groups. All they could take was hand luggage. 50 at a time, they took off for the carriers waiting in the South China Sea.
They fled any way they could, on foot, on motorcycles, in buses and trucks.
It all seemed a fitting nightmare conclusion to a war of inestimable cost to humanity. A war which had broken presidents, reshaped governments, and bitterly divided Americans. But if Vietnam had divided Americans, the bicentennial helped bring us back together. The 4th of July, 1976 marked our 200th birthday, and Americans celebrated in unique ways throughout this land of great diversity. It was with unbounded relief and joy that we unfurled our long-stored flags. What a glorious 4th, and how proudly we hailed it. Courageous acts were hard to come by in the 70s, especially around the Middle East, where hatred between Arab and Jew deepened with each year. But in 1977, Egypt's President Anwar Sadat took matters into his own hands and traveled to Israel, the first visit there ever for an Arab leader.
It was the personal touch, part of what Sadat has called his sacred duty in coming to Israel. And when he came to Golda Meir, he said, "Madam, I have waited a long time to meet you."
But the real bargaining for peace still lay ahead, to be moderated by President Carter at Camp David.
When we first arrived at Camp David, the first thing upon which we agreed was to ask the people of the world to pray that our negotiations would be successful. Those prayers have been answered far beyond any expectations.
The Camp David Summit Agreement between Egypt and Israel is being hailed this morning as an extraordinary accomplishment on the road to peace.
The scene in the White House last night was almost unbelievable. Menachem Begin of Israel and Anwar Sadat of Egypt in a bear hug that celebrated the two agreements worked out in 13 days of negotiating at Camp David.
Two dates, two images. Events that took place 444 days apart, the capture and release of the hostages in Iran. It had all started on November 4th, 1979, when, with the blessing of the Ayatollah Khomeini, Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American hostages. The most powerful country in the world was at the mercy of a fanatic and his followers. Back home, all we could do was sit and hope and pray. And that we did for more than a year before our prayers were answered.
Feeling great right now. Best I've felt in 444 days.
Down confetti-strewn avenues to the portals of the White House itself, the new American heroes were energetically welcomed home. Like the word hostage, or Woodstock, or Watergate, 3 Mile Island had no special significance before events catapulted the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania nuclear power plant into prominence. When the cooling system there broke down, radioactive steam leaked through the 4-foot-thick walls and into the air. But it wasn't until later, during the slow, careful cleanup, that we realized we had been on the verge of a full-fledged meltdown, making 3 Mile Island the symbol of one of the world's most vexing and dangerous problems. As we entered the decade of the 80s, it was this Olympic hockey game that helped give Americans a new surge of national pride, as a bunch of American college boys faced the fierce old pros of the USSR, who had not lost a game in 12 years. A big victory would mean a lot, and with just 15 seconds to play, the U.S. team fought to hold on to their one-goal lead.
11 seconds. You've got 10 seconds. The countdown going on right now. Morrow up to Schultz. 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes!
Another bright spot was the official joining of Prince Charles and Shy Di. 750 million watched on television what was being called the wedding of the century.
We are gathered here in the sight of God and in the face of this congregation to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony.
This is what all the people wanted.
We Are the World sang the voices of America's top rock stars in a historic songfest for the famine in Africa.
There comes a time when we heed a certain call, when the world must come together as one. There are people dying. Oh, when it's time to lend a hand.
In one unprecedented night, dozens of musicians sang their hearts out for an Ethiopia ravaged by the most lethal drought in modern history.
Pretending day by day that somewhere will soon make a change. We are a part of God's great big family. And the truth, you know, love is all we need.
Their words rang out and touched a sympathetic world, raising nearly $100 million, which helped to bring a population back from the edge of starvation. 1986, amidst rockets' red glare, rededicated Our Lady of Liberty. The American people rallied. We rekindled the spirit of '76, and in doing so, we rededicated ourselves to democracy. Just 1 year later, the Dow Jones average plummeted a terrifying 508 points. More than 1/3 of the market's total worth was lost by the time the final bell tolled.
He's gonna be something royal!
In trading rooms on Wall Street, there was panic. Sell orders flooded in. Stocks also plummeted overseas, and the price of gold skyrocketed. Outside the New York Stock Exchange, a sense of disbelief.
Panic, complete panic. Everyone's going crazy.
Although our new age was still victim to the whims of man, and especially his tendency to panic, reform measures and the same sophisticated computers that had helped trigger the sell-off now gave hope that 1929 and the Great Depression that followed was not in the cards for today. In the cards, though, was the real possibility of lessening the danger of nuclear annihilation. The summit meetings between Reagan and Gorbachev were the first real rays of hope between the superpowers for decades. They met in a series of dramatic sessions aimed at a nuclear arms reduction treaty.
The importance of this treaty transcends numbers. We have listened to the wisdom in an old Russian maxim. The maxim is, doverяй, no proverяй. Trust but verify.
На каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
You repeat that at every meeting.
I like it. Today, I, for the United States, and the General Secretary for the Soviet Union, have signed the first agreement ever to eliminate an entire class of U.S. and Soviet nuclear weapons. We have made history.
It was the summer when Mother Nature said no more, when pollution of all kinds became a national crisis. A summer when medical waste washed up on our beaches, when acid rain killed our trees, and a drought of historic proportions ravaged the Midwest. It was a summer when forest fires burned down nearly half of Yellowstone National Park. A summer that seemed to tell us that the greenhouse effect might already be upon us. But contrasting these toxic scenes are the battles of the environment we have won. Rivers cleaned, wilderness protected, endangered species like the bald eagle, the very symbol of our nation, made to thrive again. The question is, can we now meet this, our greatest challenge, to save the environment?
We have a goal for auto sequence.
In our final event, we reached once again for the stars. This time, the shuttle Discovery.
Start, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Balanced on its mighty plume of flame, Discovery made for the stars. Suddenly, the dream was ours again. It had been 2.5 years since the image of the Challenger was burned into our national consciousness when it exploded in a ball of fire. Now a new flight was being dedicated to the old, and America could shake its sorrow and get on with it. Get on with its vision of the future. Get on with the spirit of discovery and challenge that have always and will always make America great.
Commander out now, rotating the nose down, standing by for nose gear and touchdown.
Discovery, welcome back. A great ending to the new beginning.
We have just witnessed 25 landmark events from the past 25 years. Some were achievements of the highest order. Others should act as stern warnings. A few were testaments to the nobility of humans, and still others showed the depths to which we sometimes sink. Taken together, these events tell us much about the new precarious age in which we live.